So as we travel down the road of the destruction of a nation, we've gone through the mockery of God, we've gone through the ignoring of God, the forgetting of God, and the removal of God. So what comes after that? What comes after removing God from your worldview, from your society? Well, you got to replace him with something. So what do you replace him with? Well, if you come to Isaiah chapter 5, verse 21, he says, "Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight." So what has happened? This passage starts, the section that I'm looking at starts in verse 8, and the first concern is that of ignoring God. Then it moves to, by the time you get to verse 11, the next woe that is given by Isaiah is those who forget God. They act like, he just isn't relevant to anything. They move down, they progress into the mockery of God, making fun of him. And what's the goal in making fun of him? To remove him from power, which is the next one, to remove him from society, so that now that we have impugned the honor of God, now that we brought him down to our level, there's no reason why he has any moral authority over us. And so since that is the case, we replace him with ourselves, because look, we brought him down to us. And I've got as good of an idea of what's right and wrong as he does. This is the logical progression of a nation that decides to forget God. It just starts with pushing him to the side. Let me read that verse again. It just said in verse 20, however, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight." In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil." This moral order that is found here in Isaiah, in the destruction of a nation, starts by moving away from the simple fear of God. There's no humility left. There's no willingness to be a student at the feet of Christ to learn what he and his word has to say about the issues of the world. Instead, I can find mistakes with him after I've ignored him and forgot him. And normally we've pushed the word of God completely out of sight. And if we have thought of it at all, it's to mock it. It's to find a problem with it. And we become quite wise in our own eyes. And we, the created, think we know more than the Creator. We think we now have the moral authority to determine what is right and what is wrong. So that's how you destroy a nation. That's how you end its moral fabric. Once the morality is gone, it's over. Everything hangs in a society. Everything hangs on trust. One of my sons is learning how to drive right now. And in learning how to drive, I was talking to him about that basic principle. So much of the time when you're driving down the road, you just have to trust the person next to you that they're actually going to do what they say they're going to do. When they hit their blinker, you have to trust that they're actually going to take that turn. And once the trust breaks down, it all starts to fall apart. Once you start to distrust government, once you start to distrust police, once you start to distrust your neighbor, what is left? Well, you shell up, man. I mean, like we all do. You're now fearful that none of these things are really out for your best interest, and therefore you can only trust on yourself in your own way. And then you coalesce with you gather the people around you who agree more or less with your kind of worldview and your way of thinking, and you try to create a moral majority to impose on the rest. That's exactly what we're seeing. Now we try to, might has made right. The most number of humans you can get together to agree on a particular opinion becomes the governing authority of the day. And that will descend into mob chaos. Mob democracy. Mob democracy is a tyranny just by another name. It's just whoever has the most guns or the most power wins. There's no longer an outside entity, an outside benevolent being who is saying that which and giving and informing us as to what is right and wrong. And now, what do you have? What's left? When you deny God, when you forget him, when you mock him, and you remove him, you got to replace him. And the thing to replace him with is humanity. And this is exactly what we do. Once you remove God, government becomes God. People start looking to government to do things that government cannot possibly do, to answer the problems, to deal with all the issues of life, to give them hope and help. Look at all the trust, all the belief, all the imposed ideas that are now being put on government. We have let this get out of control. This is predictable, sadly, and tragically predictable. This is written. This passage we're looking at was written 2,700 years ago about, and it's so relevant today. Because sin is boring and predictable. It follows a set pattern, and it never really tends to deviate unless the Lord intervenes and by his grace and mercy shines the light of the gospel in the heart of an individual. So when I read these woeful passages, I often find the need to turn to the Gospels and read of Christ. I read these things and I look at humanity, and what do I find? I find a reason for despair and depression. And that is a great place for me to be. It takes me back to the fear of God, to where I want to learn from him. Okay, if that's the problem, if that's how messed up we are, what's the solution? How do we fix this mess? I look to God for the answers. And his answer is contained in Jesus Christ. The solution is found in the hope of the gospel. What a wonderful, glorious message we have contained within us. Simple earthenware vessels, baked dirt that has a glorious treasure inside given to us from God and his word. I hope you have hope, even as our nation crumbles, even as moral decay is rampant. I hope you have hope in the midst of that, not because of anything going on in culture, but because of what you know to be true from God, from his word. Thank you for joining me.